I'm Beth Perrell, speaking to Dr. Ena Heller. She's director of the Cornell Fine Arts Museum. You have 4 new exhibits coming out this coming week, Dr. Heller, so we wanted to make sure we let people know about that. Now, first, let's let them know about the Cornell Fine Arts Museum. You're located on the Rollins campus, is that correct?
Yes, we are. We're the College Museum of Rollins, but we act both as a college and a community art museum. We are open to the community. We're actually free of charge, and we are open 6 days a week. This new series of exhibitions starts on Thursday, January 17th.
So anyone, therefore, can come by and take a look at your exhibits. How long have you been around?
The museum has been around as the Cornell Fine Arts Museum since 1978.
Okay.
But really, art collecting at Rollins goes back to the early part of the 20th century. And before there was a Cornell Fine Arts Museum, in the same location there was the Morse Art Gallery, which later became the Morse Art Museum in a different location, but that used to be on our campus.
Well, I'm really excited about these 4 exhibits that you have opening on January 17th. And one in particular that I'm going to start with, and I bet you can guess the one, is Body Snatchers. And
yes.
Just the title kind of grabs you. So it's Body Snatchers, Death and Culture. It runs from January 17th to April 7th. Tell us about this exhibit.
Yes. So that exhibition is actually a wonderful illustration of how we work here at the Cornell and really of the mission of a college art museum, of a teaching art museum, which is a little bit different than your regular public museums in that we work a lot with our faculty and our students. And that exhibition was co-organized with an English class and their professor, and it comes from the permanent collection of the museum, and it's really an exhibition that talks about the fascination of artists with the human body, and especially with death, the dead human body through history. So it goes really from an ancient sarcophagus, a 2nd century Roman sarcophagus, to contemporary art. And that's something that really connected with the other exhibitions. Generally, in a season, although we do a number of different exhibitions, as you mentioned, 4 in this case, we try to have a common theme, and we always have these red threads that go through what we do and connect the different exhibitions. And this particular season, what we're looking at in all 4 exhibitions is the idea of art conversations through time and through different media, and focusing the majority of the exhibitions, 3 out of 4, focusing on the permanent collection of the museum, which has grown and changed a lot in the last 5 years. We only show a very small part of the collection in the museum because the space is as it is. And so we decided to celebrate and highlight more of what's been happening in the collection, but also include, favorites from the collection with new acquisitions, with things that haven't been on view for a while, and create these conversations that talk about a specific theme throughout the ages.
And I was going to ask you about the media that come together in these exhibits, because when I read the title, Body Snatchers, Death and Culture, my mind went immediately to death masks. And, throughout time, how those have been a way to sort of capture the memory of someone once they passed, not, though, necessarily something we do modern day. What are the
That's
different...
very true.
Yeah, what are the kinds of things that come out?
We don't have a death mask, which is probably an oversight. That's a really good notion. We have, so the notion of body snatchers really comes out of the 18th century when there was a rise of surgical education, and so there was a demand for cadavers, for dissection. Before then, artists had done that in secret. We have the stories of Michelangelo and Leonardo, stealing bodies to dissect them and learn anatomy, but that was really frowned upon by the Christian church. Anyway, in the 18th century, there was a huge demand, and there's this new trade almost, as it were, called body snatchers that, met that demand. But that's where the title comes from. The idea then, in a way, is that it makes all of us, the exhibition puts us in that visual situation of a body snatcher, looking at how people, artists, through the centuries have depicted death, have dealt with it, and what the different symbolisms are from that very clinical, anatomical need of studying the body to the religious reverence that a devotional picture with, say, the dead body of Christ would depict. So in that particular exhibition, we have, as I mentioned, a Roman sarcophagus, so a big sculptural piece. We have paintings, we have prints, and we even have an example of modern taxidermy.
In the end, was there a whole difference that one could see in the canvas as a result of these artists learning about the body that way?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. What we associate now with the Renaissance, that new realism, naturalism that was really introduced in painting and sculpture in the 15th century with the Italian Renaissance, was a direct result of actual anatomical study of the body. Before then, if you look at medieval art, the depictions are much more stylized. They're much more abstracted, to use a modern term, because they did not necessarily have a full knowledge and understanding of how the body works.
Now, the other thing I want to circle back to is you said you had a sarcophagus, and so you brought it out for this exhibit? Where did that come from?
Yes, that's generally on view. It's actually on long-term loan from a private lender from Florida, and we generally have it in the permanent collection gallery, but we brought it into this other gallery for this particular, because obviously that's a receptacle, right? The receptacle of a dead body, and it goes back to Roman antiquity. So it's also an interesting conversation there between how funerary rites happened in ancient Europe versus Renaissance, versus our modern and contemporary approach to death and depicting death.
Well, again, the exhibit is called Body Snatchers, Death and Culture, and I just know that people listening are going to be like me and go, I've got to see that. But let's talk about the place as metaphor. This is another really interesting idea for an exhibit. It's collection conversations. Tell us about the place as metaphor.
Right. So that is really the anchor exhibition, in that it takes two of our larger galleries, and that's the one that mostly looks at our collection and how it has changed and grown over the last 5 years in particular. We've added almost 800 new works of art to the collection in the last 6 years, and a lot of them have not been able to be displayed. We also have others that have been in the collection for a long time but have not been on view for a while, again, due to lack of space. So we looked at the collection, and we have a very broad-based collection that goes from antiquity to the 21st century, but really the most important sections of the collection start with the Renaissance and go forward in time. And because of that, the collection really lends itself very well to this notion of transhistorical conversation, of a conversation through time. And so we wanted to look at how we can establish those conversations around this notion of place, and place defined very broadly, because you think of a place as literal, as an imagined place, as a symbolic place, and we deal with art that starts in the 14th and goes through the 21st century around some thematic groupings. But they really, what they show, I think the other wonderful thing about this exhibition is that it highlights, again, our mission as a teaching museum. Another class actually worked with us, an art history class this time, on that exhibition. But also these conversations are not only through time and through different media, but they're also interdisciplinary. Our take on art in general, and very well illustrated in this particular exhibition, is that art is a door into a world, not only into the world of art, but into a world of political issues, social issues, identity, broadening perspectives, literacy more general. I think that art can open our minds and our students' minds and all our visitors' minds really to a very broad series of issues and themes. And so, to me, art is that wonderful ambassador, because you don't have to be an art person to admire it. I think it enriches and enlarges our lives, no matter what our personal interests are. And that exhibition really shows that, because it brings together disparate objects before. We have paintings, we have prints, we have sculptures, we have a video piece, we have neon sculptures. So really a multitude of mediums, some more traditional than others. But you see that there's a continuum through these thematic sections that artists, maybe who lived 400 years, apart, were concerned with the same issues and were relating to their contemporary realities in a very similar way. The results are different because they're a result of the time in which they were created, but the creative processes and the creative issues continue to be the same, and I think that's the most interesting thing about art, that you can relate to it even if it was done a very long time ago.
Yeah, I like that idea of the conversation, because conversation, just as we're doing, is two-way. And sometimes we think of art as an artist expressing himself or herself, and we see it, but it really is a conversation even over time, as you describe it.
Absolutely, and artists and art historians like me will tell you that the conversation engendered by art does not end with the moment when the artist finished the work, right? The public, the person who looks at the art, is such an important part of that conversation as well, because every one of us look at art with different eyes and through the prism of our own experiences. So what I see may be very different from what you see or from somebody else, and that's really the beauty of it.
I'm curious, when people see this collection or this particular exhibit, is there a way to continue that conversation in the immediate? Will there be, tours or that kind of thing where people can chat with others about it?
Yes, absolutely. We have a whole roster of events that include both special lectures that sort of amplify some of the themes in the exhibition, and tours, more or less formal, so smaller or larger tours, where we are always so happy to have feedback from our visitors, questions, comments, and so that's the best part, is watching, after we've put an exhibition up, watching the reaction and the conversation that it engenders in the people who come through it.
Now, I want to ask a sidebar question. I'm just kind of interested in the idea of the curator putting this together, because it sounds like you have such an extensive collection. How do you make the choices about what to put in or out of these particular exhibits?
That's a very difficult question, and it's always a difficult choice. Generally, the hardest part is to choose the themes. And then once we have a theme for an exhibition, going through the collection and seeing what pieces fit within that theme is an easier task. Of course, then you're going to have to leave some out. But I think I always struggle with creating that right balance of, any one season or any one year, creating that right balance between exhibitions that address historical art and contemporary art, because, we have both in the collection, exhibitions that will be timely in terms of what's happening in our society, exhibitions that would open the minds of our students and connect with the curriculum of study, exhibitions that our community would enjoy. So there are all those constituencies and all those ideas to keep in mind. And, we do our best to please everybody, and I'm sure we never do.
Well, so far I'm really enjoying this, so thank you. I've been speaking to Dr. Ena Heller. She's the director of the Cornell Fine Arts Museum. We have two more exhibits to talk about, and one is called Transitional Generation. So tell us about this exhibit, which again starts on January 17th and runs through April.
Yes, this is another exhibition from the permanent collection of the museum, and it's a photography exhibition by the Cuban photographer Jose Figueroa. He is born in Havana in the 1940s, and what this exhibition was occasioned by is the 60th anniversary of the Cuban Revolution in 1959. So we looked at that historical event and how this one photographer documented history in the making in Cuba. Now, and the reason it's called Transitional Generation, that was a term that actually the artist's wife coined for their generation, because she said they were too young to participate in the actual events Figueroa was born in the 40s, in the late 1940s, but old enough to witness it and to understand what's going on. So he very much documented history in the making. A lot of his photographs are of people who left Cuba, after the revolution, and entire families who were torn apart because, they were trying to leave and come mostly to the United States. But he has a number of different series of photographs that are illustrated in this exhibition. He talks about his art, and I think that defines it really nicely overall, as a Cuban self-portrait, that he looks with equal power at his individual experience, or a person's individual experience, and that kind of larger historical event that swept up the country.
When you look at these photographs, you do see sort of the movement of time, the movement of the culture from then to now?
Not so much in that way. You see more the movement of people, and some of the movement of culture in a rather abstracted way. But you see a lot of scenes of goodbyes and of families leaving. You see some of the photographs of people like Che Guevara and influential people in that whole movement, and you. It's interesting because you look at it, for us here, you look at it from a distance, but at the same time, there are certain experiences that resonate with all of us, even if we weren't, born there or from there. I think the whole notion of the immigrant experience, which is such an important experience for our country, is something that resonates, and yet it has this very personal, not emotional in a kind of obvious way, but really very heartfelt sentiment to his otherwise documentary photographs.
Really interesting. Will this artist be there, though, to talk to at any point?
He will not, because he doesn't live here. But the fourth exhibition that we have, the De La Torre brothers, Rococo Lab, the two De La Torre brothers will be here, and they are a very interesting couple, really, because they are brothers, and they work together to the point where they say that sometimes they look at a piece and they don't know which one of them started it and who completed it. So their work together is so seamless, it's almost if it were a single person. And the other thing that's really interesting about the De La Torre brothers is that they were born in Mexico, in Guadalajara, and they now live both in Mexico and in California. So they have this bicultural life and experience which influences their art and everything they do. And so they do glass sculpture and lenticulars, which are printed images with an illusion of depth that seem to be moving as you look at them, which is really amazing, because you look at this big image from a different angle and it seems to be moving with you and revealing new details. And their work is extremely intricate. There's this combination of art historical quotations from old paintings and historical characters that you may recognize, together with a lot of pop culture, and so that's another conversation. That's, as I was saying before, the theme that runs through all these exhibitions. It's a conversation again through time, some important figures to Mexican history, some contemporary political and figures, but also cultural, and but at the same time, at the basis of their art, there's this conversation about high and low culture, about the everyday and the elitist, and really there's a lot of humor, a lot of irony, but I think there's a very profound and serious dimension to their art that talks about the history of colonization and the history of Christianization of the Americas. So superimposing that alien foreign culture coming from Europe and new religion to the indigenous populations there. And that's a red thread through their art. That's, again, in this humorous contemporary garb, but it's always there, and it asks some very profound questions.
Now, are these items also from your collection?
No, this exhibition is the only one that is on loan. We have borrowed most of these pieces either from the brothers or from collections that their pieces are in from a gallery that they work with.
And where does the name Rococo Lab come from? Is that a place?
That's a name they chose, and it comes. Rococo is an artistic style in the 18th century that follows the Baroque. Their compositions are often referred to as Baroque, which was a style that followed the Renaissance and had this combination of a lot of decoration and very ornate. But Rococo is a lighter version of that. The Baroque has this dark and very religious character. Rococo was more for domestic art, so you think of palaces of the French kings in the 18th century with a lot of decoration, but it's airy and it's less serious, and they thought that term, so Rococo Lab, a laboratory of the Rococo in the 21st century, they thought that describes their art and that notion of bringing together all these different objects and the layers. Their art has a lot of layers, a lot of details, a lot of interesting and sometimes unexpected juxtapositions, so they thought that would be a good name for this particular project.
So interesting that they're brothers who work so closely together in their art. Is that unusual?
Yes. It's very unusual, especially when they talk about this fact that they don't even, they don't work like this is mine and this is yours. They work together on the same piece. And they actually will be here not only at the opening, but the following day, the day when the exhibitions open on January 17th, they will be giving a talk here at the museum at 6 o'clock in the evening, talking about, how they make art and their experience and their collaboration. And that's open to the public and free as well.
Should people do reservations, or is it just come?
No, it's pretty much first come, first serve. If you want to get a seat, you might want to come a little bit early, but the conversation will start at 6 o'clock.
Well, we have heard about these 4 exhibits, and they sound wonderful. They're starting January 17th. 2 of them run through the first week of April, the other 2 through May. What is around these exhibits? Tell us about your permanent exhibits.
So right now, this is all that there will be on view because the Place as Metaphor exhibition replaces our permanent collection display. So we generally have one gallery that's dedicated to the permanent collection, and that will be included in the Places Metaphor for this season. So the two galleries that show that exhibition will be our permanent collection galleries.
Really good. That says for people who have been to the Cornell before, come on back. You'll see something new.
Exactly. There's always something different here. Absolutely.
Well, Dr. Heller, what final thoughts do you have for us?
Well, I just hope that your listeners will be encouraged by this conversation to come and have their own conversations at our museum. Again, we are open 6 days a week. We're only closed on Mondays, and we welcome everybody. Come once, come many times. I think what I always tell people at the museum is that a first visit just whets your appetite. And coming back, you will see the same things with different eyes. So even if the exhibition hasn't changed, coming back may give you a different glimpse into the art. And also, consider coming to some of our events. They're all online. They're all free to the public. And we have some really interesting speakers coming up this season that will talk from the artist's perspective, from the scholar's perspective, and will help guide the conversations that otherwise we can have on our own. And thank you so much for featuring us on your program.
It has been a pleasure speaking to you, Dr. Ena Heller. She's director of the Cornell Fine Arts Museum. I'm Beth Perrell.